Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, we're talking more about Orbital, their film soundtracks, and some other random stuff that I didn't already mention. Yeah, we're not quite done with Orbital yet. In most cases, this would be where I do an odds and ends video, where I talk about basically all the tracks I haven't already discussed, but there's very little I haven't already touched on in digressions from the main reviews. I will be covering the random smattering of tracks I feel are worth a mention at the end of this video. But as you might guess, this video is mostly about Orbital's soundtrack work. Now, I think it should be no secret that I quite enjoy film music. You know, stuff specifically designed to set moods for movies, and oftentimes are fun to listen to out of context from the movies they're set to. And I also quite enjoy when bands I like try their hands at soundtracking, because it often leads to such releases that can be easily enjoyed out of context, as seen with artists like Daft Punk, or to a lesser extent Air. So that Orbital tried their hands at film scoring not once, not twice, but 3 times, sounds like an exciting prospect, right? Well, see, as much as I hate to say it, Orbital are not exactly the best film composers in the world. Now, actually, I've gone out of my way to see all 3 of the movies they scored so I can discuss them in better detail. This is the first time I'm really doing this, because I did not do that for the Virgin Suicides. Because, like, it is still my philosophy that the best soundtracks are the kind that are entertaining listens completely out of context from the films. Like, you can listen to the Tron Legacy soundtrack and have fun without ever having seen the movie. Even though the movie is pretty cool too. When a film soundtrack is released by a band I like, will it be cool to see it in context of the movie? Sure, but I want it to also feel like I'm listening to the artist in question, trying their hands at something you wouldn't get out of them otherwise. Now then, the first one they did wasn't even fully theirs, actually, but I have to mention it regardless. They worked with Michael Kamen on the score to the 1997 movie, Event Horizon. First of all, the movie itself does not even credit Orbital at all. Like, the only part where I recognized Orbital's work was during the opening credits, which shows "Score by Michael Kamen," and then just never mentions them again, not even in the end credits. In a lot of ways, this is kinda true of the Score album as well, but Orbital are much more of a presence there than they are in the actual movie. See, there are 4 tracks on the soundtrack album, called The Forward Decks, The Main Access Corridor, Engineering, and The Event Horizon, named after the 3 parts of the ship, and the ship itself in the movie. Yeah, this is stuff you could only pick up on if you were familiar with the soundtrack before seeing the actual movie. Now, honestly, this album gets kinda repetitive and samey. Well, really repetitive and samey. By the time I'm at the track Engineering, I'm just kinda sick of the way it sounds, but the other tracks are worthy of note. The last track, The Event Horizon, is notable for just being really short and being an easy summary of everything you had already heard throughout the soundtrack. And the first 2 focus more specifically on the 2 names attached to the score in the first place. The Main Access Corridor is mostly Michael Kamen, a lot of focus on orchestrations, and is most of what you hear throughout the movie. But the track The Forward Decks is the reason for Orbital fans to check this out, and is really the only track you need to listen to from here. Again, it's not all Orbital, the orchestrations are still there, but this is by far the most Orbital-centric track on here. It's 14 minutes long, there's 8 movements, and it's quite the fun ride. Orbital's contributions to this entire album are kind of repetitive. They provide the same dark techno beats combined with creepy, hellish SOS voices edited around occasional unnerving synths. You can hear some influences in there from songs of theirs like Petrol or later Meltdown. And yeah, Michael Kamen's orchestrations do kind of make this track more fun and interesting to listen to. There's this pretty awesome part around the 10-minute mark of the first track where their talents are combined to maximum potential. So yeah, I guess final word on the Event Horizon soundtrack is that it's interesting as a novelty and is the kind of thing I can return to occasionally, but just kind of barely merits the Orbital name on it. As a side note, while I can see the movie itself got some pretty polarizing views, speaking as someone who doesn't watch any horror movies, I actually thought it was pretty good. Thought it was good for what it was, kind of cheesy, but Like, it progressively got creepier. All came together pretty well, leading up to a pretty disturbing third act. I can see why some people love it and some people hate it. Doug Walker made his thoughts pretty clear on the film. I agree with some of the stuff he said, but not all of the stuff he said. I'd be lying if I said I didn't personally find it to be pretty dang creepy myself. Except this part. This part is hilarious.
I'm waiting.
I don't see myself ever watching Event Horizon again, but I didn't hate it or anything. But the score album for Event Horizon, for me, is a solid 7 out of 10. Now, going back to Orbital's film work, before doing their first score all by themselves, they did 2 singles that kind of worked into movies as well. First, in 2000, they made a single with Angelo Badalamenti called Beached, which was for the movie The Beach. This is a great track, as you might expect. It's really sunny and happy, and even kind of nostalgic with these monologues talking about paradise, and this actually pretty catchy melody that kind of repeats throughout the track. I have not seen the movie yet, but the song Beached it's good. It's worth checking out. Then 2002, they made a track for a dance club scene in the movie Triple X starring Vin Diesel, which I've also not seen yet. I've seen parts of it, though. The track was called Technologique Park, and it's another really underrated gem in their catalog. It's kind of how you would expect how a scene with a Fast and Furious guy in a dance club would be soundtracked. Dark and intense, but 100% with all that Orbital charm. Kind of like a less hard-hitting and percussive, but more driving and fast-paced version of Tunnel Vision from the Blue Album. Another track totally worth looking into. But then let's get into the first film soundtrack Orbital ever did 100% by themselves. Octane. As far as being a purely out-of-context enjoyable listening experience, Octane is easily the best of the 3 soundtracks that Orbital worked on. There's a good amount of variety, the main themes are memorable and don't wear off with their repeating over the course of the album itself, just overall pretty solid. There are some highlights. The title track and main theme is clearly cut from the same cloth as older tracks of theirs like Door Booter and Shadows. Sonically closer to the latter, what with its vibraphone melodies. But while that song was was more kind of campy and like kids' Halloween TV special kind of creepy, this album, just in general, does a much better job of like actually setting that creepy mood. It's more minimalistic and subtle, and as a result, much more effective. Most of the score kind of follows suit from that main theme, with plenty of cool ambient variations and some of that weird percussion that is very much Orbital, but yet still fits in with the tone of the movie. Other highlights include Preacher, which starts out with these light electric piano chords before slowly getting creepier and creepier and then just cutting out. Chasing the Tanker is suitably fast-paced and frantic. And of course Initiation is like kind of a more creepy club track. Probably the standout on the soundtrack, not only for leaning on Orbital's strengths, but also for being a track that doesn't use the melody of the main theme, but yet is still pretty catchy by itself. Now, the soundtrack isn't perfect, and there's one track that really pisses me off on this album, that being The Road Ahead. It sounds like a rehash of the main theme, which itself does not exactly add to the experience, but is understandable. But perhaps more importantly, it ends in like 40 seconds of silence, and then just finishes with a giant, cheap jump scare. Like, bleh. Like, really guys? Really? You did not need to resort to a cheap tactic like that. Especially not on the soundtrack album that you previously did such a good job of keeping the mood subtle. So yeah, the soundtrack loses major points just for basically the last 5 seconds, but otherwise is totally worth checking out. And as for the movie, well, the movie does not appear to have been very well received, mainly thanks to a plot that has a lot of kind of silly and cliched elements and fairly major plot points that are left open without any explanation. So, I guess you could take my word with a grain of salt, but I don't know. Maybe again, it could be that I don't watch a lot of these kinds of movies and don't pick up on these cliches, but it was by far my favorite of the 3 movies. Heck, I can see myself coming back to watch this one again. I really liked it. Madeline Stowe plays this neurotic mom character who wants to protect her daughter from some weird cult that takes her in. Her performance is fantastic and really made the movie that much better. Also, the atmosphere and cinematography are really something else, as well as the soundtrack, for obvious reasons. It is kind of a style over substance movie, I think. It's certainly not the best I've ever seen. I'm a little wary about giving it a full-on recommendation, thanks to the fact it seems to be widely considered pretty bad. And any good qualities that people might have had were thrown out the window in the last third. But for me personally, I found it to be really good. Thumbs up on both the movie and the soundtrack, the latter of which gets a 7.7 out of 10 from me. But then that brings us to Pusher. This was the last thing they released before their final breakup. Well, they released one more single, we'll get to that. And as a pure soundtrack album, Pusher is probably the weakest of the three. You know something's not right when my favorite track from an Orbital soundtrack isn't even by Orbital. That honor goes to one of the bonus tracks or whatever at the end. The track The Music by Marcus Marr. I found to be really catchy and fun new disco track, kind of getting some vague Daft Punk vibes out of that one. So that's a really good one, but the main soundtrack, like, it gets the job done for what it is, but nothing about it particularly sticks out to me or merits a lot of repeat listens. The most memorable song on here is probably Driving and Clubbing, and that's because it directly reprises Lady LaSure's rapping from Wonky. And it isn't nearly as fun as the original song. Now again, Pusher is not a bad soundtrack by any stretch. There is a recurring motif seen on tracks like Turkish Tension, Frank Mirror, and Frank Car Freak that I can kind of recall. By the way, the one thing that's different about this soundtrack is that there's a long list of tracks that are, and a lot of them are like really short, like about a minute or so. So that probably adds to the lack of enjoyment there. Again, the atmosphere is nice, combining Orbital's typical stylings with some suspenseful ambience and dark techno beats. It's enjoyable, but it just does not stick with you in the same way that the themes from Event Horizon and Octane do. Like once, I was talking with my dad and my little brother about like how well we knew the music on our iPods. So I like put my iPod on shuffle. I told my dad I could identify the artist of any song that came up. My dad can do that with his iPod. And I had a pretty good run, but what killed me was when a track from Pusher came up and I was unable to recognize it was Orbital. And my little brother was like, "Ha! You don't know an Orbital song! I thought you knew all their songs." I figured if it was Orbital I could recognize the melody, but that's kind of the problem. Pusher's soundtrack is good as a soundtrack, but as an out-of-context listening experience, it's easily the least impactful thing they've released to date. There's plenty of nice highlights here and there, though. Pusher theme is, of course, some pretty nice Orbital-style techno. Bridge Deal has a nice melody, has some cool atmospherics. Hacken Bar has these cool harp sounds, and its menacing vibe is pretty nice. VVIP has some pretty abstract and unique progressions. Cab to Danica's combines the dark and spooky ambience with the more intense dark techno sounds. Just does a pretty good job of summing up the vibe of the whole soundtrack in one fairly fleshed out track. There's also Party Freak, which has an intro of almost straight harsh noise, which is interesting, and I don't think I actually remember seeing that in the movie, but whatever. And of course the final tracks on here, the 11-minute Go With The Flow and the 6-minute Guns and Party, which are some pretty fun rides. Go With The Flow is undoubtedly the highlight from this soundtrack, which comprises basically the last 15 minutes of the movie, including the credits. It's probably the track from this soundtrack that I've come back to the most, although that's not saying much since I haven't come back to Pusher all that much in the first place. Starts out kinda all over the place and almost comes to a dead stop near the beginning. But it's basically the only track that sticks around long enough to actually be memorable in any way, and even so, they've done better. So yeah, not super taken by the soundtrack out of context, but what about in context? Well, unfortunately, actually watching Pusher did not actually change anything. In fact, I think I might actually like the soundtrack even less after having seen the movie. Pusher was my least favorite of the three movies, and I would have a hard time explaining to you exactly why. Everything about this movie was just okay. Aside from one actor who plays a character called Tony, who is absolutely insufferable. The acting isn't bad. The cinematography is super over the top and flashy, which I suppose is interesting, but it felt kind of forced upon this, like, kind of down and dirty story about a drug dealer who slowly gets fucked over the course of a week. I was actually kind of expecting to like it more since I like, this is a remake of a film from 1997. I saw the original. And, like, it was kind of shot like a documentary. It was, like, super hyper-realism kind of stuff. And it was also in Danish, which, it was interesting in theory, but I found it to be really boring. But the 2012 version, it's like some Baz Luhrmann sort of take on the story. I just found myself to only be marginally invested in it in any given time. Like, I hoped that the main character, Frank, would get along okay at the end. And as much as I hate to say it, I think Orbital may have partially been to blame for this as well. Like, they may have enhanced the spooky atmosphere of Octane to a very spot-on effect. But here, they were just kind of there and didn't, like, call attention to themselves. They just didn't totally feel like the right fit for this movie. They made the music fit the scenes, but didn't really intensify anything. I don't know what to say. It was just an all-around okay movie that probably isn't that much worth your time, whether or not you were a fan of the original. In fact, if you were a fan of the original, you probably are less likely to enjoy it. The Pusher soundtrack album, though, I suppose it's worth a shot if you're an Orbital completionist like myself. But personally, they are capable of so much better than this, and I'm feeling a 6.3 out of 10. But now let's discuss a handful of songs that I haven't already mentioned in my other Orbital reviews. So let's just go down them as quickly as I can. I'm not going to discuss every song that hasn't already been discussed already because I don't want to keep you sitting here too long, but I'll mention all the ones that I think are most worth mentioning. Okay, let's go. B-side of the original Chime single is called Deeper, and it's got this cool, like, relaxation tape sample on, which is pretty funny. Focus your attention on the spot. I think that's a good one. That one's worth checking out. Omen is their second single after Chime, and it's almost as good as Chime, but for very different reasons. It's very intentionally unnerving and hypnotic, kind of dark and weird. I think would go on to better define their continuing career, maybe even better than Chime did in some ways. Also, it's surprisingly catchy. Got a couple of different hooks, and they all stick the landing. I see the future, I can't afford it. Tell you the truth, someone just bought it. I see the future. There's also a B-side to that track called Open Mind, which is pretty good too, although the version off of that single is okay, but I actually kind of like a remix of it. Like, I remember buying the track off of iTunes when it was part of some random compilation that nobody cares about called Hypnotic State. Though really early on, like before even buying the Blue Album CD. So a lot of nostalgia there, and the vocoders all over this track are pretty cool. Individual will. So yeah, I think it's called the Funky Alternatives Mix or something like that. That's the version you should check out. But whatever. Oh, and there's also an EP of alternate remixes of Omen, which happens to be here, one of the only vinyl records that I own. It's not bad. It's not super interesting, to be honest. The Wheel of Fortune mix here is the best one. Anyway, the 3 EP, which has the original Satan and Belfast on it. It also has a B-side called LC1, which is pretty cool. It has this neat alien theme to it. Very Green Album-y sort of track, worth checking out. And the Radiccio EP, which has the original version of Halcyon on it. Also has a couple of decent B-sides, kind of like the kind of dark and odd The Naked and the Dead, and its more repetitive counterpart The Naked and the Dub, as well as the surprisingly dark but also pretty interesting Sunday. So that's cool, I guess. Worth a listen, I suppose. And then let's skip ahead to 2002, where they released a DJ mix called Back to Mine, which contained an exclusive track called Ska'd for Life, which is actually a super underrated track. It's like, it lives up to its name, you know, ska. It's unlike anything else they've ever done. Super peppy and sunny and energetic and up-tempo, with a lot of these horn sections and even organ melodies. It's a cheesy track, but it's absolutely worth looking into. And on the exact opposite end of the coin, there's a B-side on the One Perfect Sunrise single called What Happens Next, which is much darker and more percussive. Could have fit all right on the Blue Album, I guess. It's a fun track, worth looking into. So, what else? Paul did 2 songs for the game Wipeout Pure called Boot Up and Ignition. Those are both pretty nice, fit the futuristic racing game they were made for. What else? There's a compilation they came out with in 2009. 20. Got the CD here. Of course, celebrating their 20th anniversary. For the most part, it's not that much worth your time. Musically, it's notable for having Omen and Naked and the Dead, as well as an excellent remix of Halcyon done by Tom Middleton of Global Communication fame. But if there's any reason to get 20, it is this cool pull-out poster that's in the CD insert. There we go. Oh, come on. There. This thing. Okay, so, like, this is like this big circular chart that shows their entire career up from 1989 when they started to 2009 when 20 came out. And that is pretty awesome. But anyway, the actual last thing that they released before their quote-unquote final breakup was a, weirdly enough, a Christmas single, Christmas Chime, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's Chime with, like, jingle bells and stuff. It's almost kind of a joke song, really, but I have no qualms putting it on during Christmas, personally, and the Jib Jab video they did for it is kind of hilarious. Finally, to end off this discography review for good, at least before the countdown video, let's discuss their most recent single, Kinetic 2017, which they used to announce their official reformation. It's okay. See, here's the thing. The original Kinetic was reworked into another single they made called Frenetic, which became notable for its kinda understandable female vocals as well as being catchy as hell and another super underrated track that is totally worth checking out. The trouble is, whenever I listen to the original Kinetic, it always seems like a demo in comparison because I like Frenetic so much. Much prefer the vocal version over the instrumental, and while the 2017 version is cool, it definitely feels like a finished version of Kinetic. Is not better than Frenetic. And also, of all the tracks to rework, why that one? Just kind of a weird pick. That being said, it did very much hype me up for whatever new material Orbital I've planned in the upcoming years. And I gotta say, it's great to have them back. And that's basically it. Until the countdown video. Of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.